You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
Welcome to this episode number, I have no idea, 16, there it is, of the Christ and Classics podcast. My name is Devin Wilkins, and I'm joined with my good buddy Colton Moore, and we are discussing, books 15, 16, and 17 of the Iliad.
That's right.
Colton, take it away. Will you summarize it for us, and then I'll ask a question?
Yeah. So, books 15, we begin with Zeus awakening from a slumber that Hera, the gods, Sleep, and Aphrodite, and even Poseidon all got together and caused.
Right.
And realizing Hera's treachery, he sees Hector lying on the battlefield, nearly dead by a boulder smashed upon him. He immediately goes to Hera, who then shifts the blame to Poseidon. Zeus
She gets out of it pretty well, actually.
She sure does. And Zeus believes her.
I know. It's like, really, buddy? Really?
Yes. Zeus then plans to reverse the tides of the war. He says he's going to send Iris to Poseidon, who will then cease from assisting the Greeks. He's also going to send Apollo to Hector to breathe power into his lungs and bravery. He's going to revive his health. Hector's then going to drive the Trojans back to the Greek ships. Achilles will send out Patroclus, his brother in arms, and all the Myrmidon troops that Achilles has led from Pythia. Then, as Hector's drawn out like a bait, Hector is going to take the bait, kill Patroclus, which will then grieve Achilles to the core. He will then come out and fight and strike down Hector. Zeus then says, quote, "And from then that day on, I'll turn the tide of the war back. The fighting goes, no stopping it, ever, all the way till Achaean armies seize the battle heights of Troy through Athena's grand design." Zeus then sends Iris to Poseidon. He sends Apollo to Hector, and they fulfill their missions. Hector then leads the charge against the Greeks, and then Nestor prays for assistance. Zeus answers, like Nestor on the Greek side. He prays, Zeus answers with thunder, cracks the thunder in the air, and the Trojans ironically believe the thunder is for them, but it's actually for the Achaeans. Patroclus leaves his buddy Eurypylus that he's been assisting, who's been wounded, and he goes to spur Achilles into combat. Achilles will refuse ultimately. The armies battle, and Hector pushes through the Greek palisade and into the trenches. Then book 16 comes around, and Patroclus is talking with Achilles about the state of affairs. The Trojans are about to push through and burn the ships. Hector then burns the ships. Achilles sends Patroclus out with Achilles' own armor on. The only thing that Patroclus doesn't have is Achilles' spear. And Patroclus leads the Myrmidon charge. This is like Patroclus's Aristia. This is his moment of excellence, where he gets a chance to slaughter hosts of enemy soldiers left and right, much like we saw with Diomedes. We saw it with the great Ajax. We saw it with Hector.
Even Agamemnon, actually.
Do what? Oh, yeah, and
Yeah.
Agamemnon. We're going to see it again with Menelaus in the next book, but here it's Patroclus's hour of glory. Zeus's son Sarpedon is killed. They fight over his body, which prefigures Patroclus, who meets Hector on the battlefield. Hector slaughters Patroclus And his last words are pretty powerful. Patroclus is dead. Achilles' best friend is dead. That's how book 16 ends. The book 17 picks up with Menelaus coming to grab Patroclus' body. He kills Euphorbus, who's the first person to spear his body to try and desecrate it. Menelaus then calls for Ajax to assist him to guard Patroclus' body. But Hector is too quick for him. He strips Patroclus of Achilles' armor before Menelaus and Ajax can get to him. And then we get a glimpse of a change in Hector. Hector then sees great Ajax, who nearly killed him back in book 15 or 14. And he's a coward. Glaucus, even, who we met in book 5, calls him a coward. And then begins this huge tug of war for Patroclus' body. The Greeks pull him, then the Trojans. The Greeks pull him, then the Trojans. And all the while, Athena and Apollo and the other gods and goddesses are fighting as well for the men over this one body. And at the end, Zeus causes the tides of the war, causes the Trojans to relent just in time for Menelaus and Meriones to take Patroclus' body back to the Greek ships. So in this section of the Iliad, and even in what's to follow, the body of Patroclus takes center stage. And Devin, what you got cooking for a question to lead us off, to kind of make sense of what's happening in this portion of Homer's epic poem?
Yes. So I'm glad you said that there at the end. That Patroclus's body takes kind of center stage. And my question is broad, and hopefully we can get some steam out of it here. But my question is mainly this: why is it Patroclus's death that's the event that finally turns the tides of the war? Why this individual's death that really pushes the narrative further along? Because we've been in something of a standstill for about 15 books, not too much has been going on.
No further than the land between the Aegean Sea and the city of Troy. We've gone no further.
Right. And Patroclus doesn't seem like the most central character, but here they are all battling over his body, and Zeus goes out of his way to doom Patroclus. So what is it about Patroclus that makes him a central turning point for kind of the narrative at large and the tides of the battle? A 10-year war. Whoa.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a couple of different ways to answer the question. On one level, we have to consider Zeus's grand scheme.
The will.
It's twofold, as we keep mentioning, that he's bent on razing Troy, burning it, destroying it. We never really asked why. Even that. Maybe that's for a different time. But he's also bent on fulfilling the prayer that he promised to Thetis, which is a temporary fulfillment. It's answering Thetis' prayer is a means to the greater end of his greater will to destroy Troy. And so, why Patroclus?
You really boiled it down there.
Yeah. Well, I just had another thought as well. That's what's making me pause. I guess there's three things. One, it's a practical step for Zeus to accomplish his greater end, Troy.
Mm-hmm.
Second, I think it's a way to solve Achilles' rage problem. Achilles is sinning
Mm-hmm.
in his anger and hatred. And I
You say
think
sinning?
yeah, sinning. I think Homer goes out of his way to portray Achilles in a negative light, sulking in the ships. I mean,
Yeah.
the proem says it's cost countless Achaeans their lives.
Yeah, that's true.
And so by his best friend dying, it redirects his it solves his rage problem that we could talk about, or it will as we get to book 18 and later. And three, that's related to number two, is I think the nature of Patroclus and Achilles' friendship,
Mm-hmm.
and the nature of what Fagles translates as a brother in arms. He's not just a normal comrade on the battlefield. He's something deeper, something more profound. A deeper connection is there. Those are all real vague in general, but
So, well, if I can push in on maybe that second and third one, why would the death of a brother at arms actually cure Achilles' rage and not actually stoke it? Isn't that odd that Agamemnon taking his woman could actually promote rage, and this much more devastating act, not that the woman is not, that's not devastating, but this is more devastating because it's a lifelong friendship that actually that draws Achilles out, and as you said, maybe is a means to curing his rage caused initially by Agamemnon.
I think that particular question, Devin, is crucial to understanding, or at least beginning to understand, the role of Patroclus. And I think we get a clearer answer to that question in the following books, where we see Agamemnon repenting, Achilles repenting as a result of Patroclus's death. And I think we can try to make sense of that. We can try to make sense of the role of their friendship in the healing of Achilles' rage in later books, but not in these three books.
Okay.
That makes sense? So
Yeah.
Maybe that question is one we lead with next week.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. So then why Patroclus as the centerpiece for the turning of the tides then? We'll get to the curing the rage, but at this point we can at least, maybe we can go somewhere else if you like, but in book 16, lines 748 or so, this is let's see, okay, so Sarpedon is the son of Zeus, and in the passages that come before this, Hera actually talks Zeus into allowing allowing Sarpedon to die rather than rescuing him. He gives some interesting reasons. Let me see if I can go back and find them real quick. Hold on. Yeah, I may not be able to. Oh, here we go. So if you back up just a tad to around line 530, Hera says, do as you please, Zeus, but none of the deathless gods will ever praise you. Yep. And I tell you this, take it to heart, I urge you. If you send Sarpedon home, living still, beware. Then surely some other god will want to sweep his own son clear of the heavy fighting too. So Hera, up to this point, she's convinced Zeus to let his own son die because none of the gods would praise Zeus. That seems to mean something. And why would they not praise Zeus? Well, because it's not fair. They'll want to save their own sons too, and Zeus doesn't exactly want that. Zeus wants to have his will accomplished, not necessarily afford everyone else the same privileges that he has.
Yeah. Okay, so what's your question built off that?
So, Patroclus' death is the event that turns the tide, but perhaps you could say it's Sarpedon's death. Sarpedon has, and his death have not been central or even, up to this point, it's not been the stuff of major prophecies, but back around line 750, Zeus dooms Patroclus to die in order to draw out Achilles, it seems. But also here, around line 750 again, says, nor did mighty Zeus for a moment turn his shining eyes from the clash of battle. He kept them fixed on the struggling mass forever, the father spirit churning, thrashing out the ways, the numberless ways to cause Patroclus's slaughter. To kill him too in this present bloody rampage over Sarpedon's splendid body. Right? In other words, it seems that Zeus is motivated here not by how can I fulfill Thetis' prayer as much as how can I avenge the death of my son, Sarpedon?
So, in what specific ways, plural, does the death of Patroclus function in these chapters? And I think one answer could be what you're describing as every piece of this puzzle has a cause and effect. Like Zeus brings about the slaughter of Patroclus as a result of the death of his own son. But yet also that's also tethered to Thetis' prayer to raise up Achilles and grant him glory.
Right.
By giving him a motivation to come out later, which is this very death of Patroclus by the hand of Hector. So it's like a string puppet almost, where, well, let me just be careful. This is like a string puppet where there's 4 or 5 different strings attached to it. Like you move one string and the other 4 kind of move with it. But yet at the same time, the individuals here in the text have a real freedom. It's this tango between the sovereignty of the gods, or Zeus, and the freedom that the men actually have. The men here on the battlefield make real decisions that turn the tides of the war, while simultaneously having already been ordained by Zeus to do that which they're bound to do. So that it's this paradoxical moments where men have real freedom, and that's somehow not at odds with what Zeus ordains and predestines, to use that language. The language not I'm imposing that language on Homer, but
yeah. But it's interesting that Zeus actually his own, he has to sacrifice in order to carry out his own will. He can't let Sarpedon live. He himself is, negatively impacted by carrying out his own will to destroy Troy and to answer Thetis' prayer.
He has to suffer himself in order to accomplish his will. We saw Hera put him in a similar situation back in one of the earlier books, I believe, where I think it was maybe book 3 or so, or 4, where Menelaus and Paris were about to fight, if I'm not mistaken. Could be mistaken, but war was about to end, and the Greeks were about to win. Menelaus is going to get his girl back, and they're about to go home. And Hera's like, whoa, Zeus. We've spent too much time in this war to not burn these Trojans to the ground. If you do that, if we leave right now without burning Troy to the ground, the gods are never going to praise you. So Zeus is like, okay. But here, you bring up a really profound point, that the God of gods has to suffer in order to accomplish his will. Is there there's vast differences between what Zeus is doing here and how he's sacrificing, and the true Trinitarian God giving his only son for the life of the world, in that sense, sacrificing himself. Is there a connection there? I'm just now thinking of this on the fly. So, what are your thoughts about that kind of connection with Zeus sacrificing his son to accomplish his will, and the Christian narrative and story?
No, I was thinking the same thing. Certainly some of the overarching. It's making those. It's making me wonder if there's common grace insight there. Something of a pagan prophecy of sorts, as also happens in the Aeneid, and I think in the Odyssey as well. I'm not going to die on those hills. I'm just, it's fascinating to see, as C.S. Lewis talks about, you're seeing the myth of the dying god all throughout ancient, pagan history, not history, but myths, and how that points to, mere Christianity. And so here you have the father of the Olympians, the chief among the gods, sending his demigod son to die for the sake of carrying out his will. Except, does the death of Sarpedon yield life to the world? You're starting to lose me there, I guess. But yeah, there's something there. Anyhow, at the very least, I find it fascinating that Zeus, carrying out his own will, must come at a cost to himself. But in a similar fashion, the true God, he foreordains all things at tremendous cost to himself. And that in and of itself is
What does it
fascinating.
mean? What does it mean that an immortal being has to pay something? Like it costs. We speak in that language of it costs Zeus something, or you just said it costs God something. Is something actually taken away from? Like, does God really lose anything?
Yeah. So I wonder, and tell me what you think about this, Colton, and keep me from any heresy, okay? But I wonder if it's different because Zeus is a god who's created in the image of humans. So whereas the god of the creator God over all things in reality is above us, and we are made in his image. Well, here in this case, you have a God who is created in man's image. So it's not one step away from God as man, but it's actually maybe in some ways 2 steps away from the true God. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And if we take a few texts in the scriptures, God giving his only son, for example, and Jesus' words in the book of Acts, where he says it's more blessed to give than to receive.
Yes.
And if what it means to be God fundamentally is to be a giver, he gives himself, then he is, by biblical reasoning, the most blessed if it's more blessed to give than to receive. And so by giving, he's actually receiving by giving the most, his very self, he's actually receiving the most simultaneously, so that his giving is not necessarily in terms of a losing, but of a gaining. And for Zeus and his son Sarpedon here, it's just a loss. We see that a few times in the Iliad with when gods and goddesses lose their sons, or their sons are wounded. They grieve deeply because the loss. They'll never have their son the way they had them now on this earth ever again. But it's not so with the Christian God.
Right.
But there is a precedent in the Iliad, I think, for the gods having to sacrifice as a means toward a greater end. But it's definitely not a one-for-one correlation with the Christian scriptures.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. I was thinking that maybe man left to himself apart from divine revelation supposes these things about God, that God acts in human ways. But really, I mean, God does condescend and he does take on flesh, giving his son. But the suffering of Christ, and that's an extension even of what we're talking about, but it's a suffering by addition, rather than subtraction. He's true God and true man, and he's thereby enabled in his suffering, and and the Father gives him for that purpose. And yeah.
These three books center around Patroclus, the chief catalyst for the turning of the tides of the war, which will bring Achilles out of his ship to avenge his death. One thing we didn't talk about was the role of a dead corpse in the Iliad, and how we see both sides struggling for bodies and struggling to preserve the bodies and the sanctity thereof. We're going to talk more about that as we go along, especially as this epic poem climaxes with the death of Hector, as Zeus has foreshadowed and has promised, which Achilles knows about. Patroclus, even on his deathbed, as he was dying, his dying last words prophesied Hector's doom. And the whole poem is coming to a climactic finish, which will climax in just a surprising beauty that's unexpected. And I'm looking forward to it.
I am as well.
I think that's about all the time we have for today, Devin. There's a lot more that we can discuss that we'll try to tie in the coming episodes. We got about 18, 19, 20. We got about 2 more episodes, and we'll conclude the Iliad. And before we press on to other great pieces, any last words?
No, I think you did a great job wrapping it up there. All I could use is a little rock and roll.
Take it away, Micah.
Yes, sir.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.